There is a voice in your head that speaks to you more often than anyone else in your entire life ever will. It comments on your mistakes, predicts your failures before you've even started, and narrates your worth back to you in a tone you would never, under any circumstances, allow another human being to use with you. And most people never question it. They just assume it's telling the truth, because it sounds so familiar, so constant, so much like home. It isn't telling the truth. It's telling you the oldest, most repeated story it knows, and repetition is not the same thing as accuracy. Let's talk about where this voice actually comes from, because understanding its origin is the first step to no longer mistaking it for fact. That inner critic wasn't born with you. It was built, piece by piece, out of every harsh comment you internalized, every comparison you were subjected to, every time you were made to feel that your worth was conditional on performance. Somewhere along the way, that external criticism moved inside, and you started running it on yourself automatically, faster and more efficiently than anyone outside ever could. The tragedy isn't that other people were once critical of you. It's that you kept the job running long after they left the room. Here's the mechanism worth understanding: your inner critic thinks its job is to protect you. It believes that if it attacks you first, preemptively, harshly, before you can fail or be embarrassed or be rejected, it's somehow shielding you from a worse pain later. It's not accurate, and it's not helpful, but it is, in its own broken way, trying to keep you safe using the only method it was ever taught. Knowing that doesn't make the voice disappear. But it does change your relationship to it, from believing it, to recognizing it as an overprotective, outdated system running old code. Now here's what almost nobody tells you about self-talk: the way you speak to yourself becomes the ceiling on what you'll attempt. If your internal narration says, "You always mess this up," every time you try something new, you will unconsciously start avoiding new things, not because you're incapable, but because your brain is trying to avoid confirming a story it's heard 1,000 times. The voice doesn't just comment on your life. Left unchecked, it starts directing it. Think about how specifically this voice was built, because the specificity matters. It's rarely a single traumatic sentence. It's usually hundreds of small moments: a report card that was never good enough, a comparison to a sibling or a classmate, a joke at your expense that landed harder than anyone realized, a household where love felt conditional on achievement. None of those moments, alone, seem large enough to explain a lifetime of harsh self-talk. But repetition doesn't need drama to be powerful. A quiet message, repeated 1,000 times over 20 years, becomes indistinguishable from your own voice, even though it was never actually yours to begin with. It was installed. Which means, importantly, it can be examined, and it can be rewritten. Here's what the flip actually sounds like in practice, because it's easy to describe in theory and much harder to picture concretely. The old voice says, "You're going to embarrass yourself, just like last time." The flipped, accurate version doesn't pretend the fear isn't there. It says, "I'm nervous because this matters to me, and I'm doing it anyway." Notice that the second version isn't naive positivity. It doesn't deny the discomfort. It just refuses to let the discomfort be the final verdict on what you're capable of. Let's make this practical, because naming the problem isn't the same as solving it. The first shift is separation. When the critical voice shows up, the goal isn't to silence it through force. That rarely works and often makes it louder. The goal is to notice it as a voice, not as truth. There's a difference between the thought, "I'm going to fail at this," and the awareness, "There's that old fear talking again." The first one you're trapped inside of. The second one you have some distance from, and distance is where choice becomes possible. The second shift is interrogation. Ask the voice a simple question: would I say this exact sentence, in this exact tone, to someone I love who was struggling with the same thing? If the honest answer is no, and it almost always is, that's your evidence that the voice isn't operating from truth. It's operating from fear, dressed up as honesty. Truth doesn't need to be cruel to be effective. Cruelty is usually a sign that what's speaking isn't wisdom, it's old pain repeating itself. The third shift is replacement, not suppression. Trying to force positive thoughts on top of a loud inner critic usually backfires, because your brain doesn't believe empty affirmations it has no evidence for. Instead, replace the harsh sentence with an accurate one. Not, "I'm amazing at this," but "I'm still learning this, and that's allowed." Not, "I never follow through," but "I've struggled with follow through before, and I'm working on that now." Accuracy is more powerful than forced positivity, because your brain can actually believe something true. Here's something worth sitting with, because it changes how urgent this actually is. The inner critic doesn't just affect how you feel. It affects what you attempt, what you finish, and what you allow yourself to want out loud. Every goal you've quietly shrunk, every dream you've downgraded to something more realistic, before anyone even challenged it, look closely, and you'll usually find that voice was there first, editing your ambition down to a size it decided was safe. This doesn't mean the critical voice disappears overnight, and it doesn't mean you're broken because it's still there. Even people who look completely self-assured from the outside still have a version of this voice. The difference isn't the absence of the voice. It's the relationship they've built with it. They've learned to notice it, question it, and choose their next action anyway, instead of letting it cast the deciding vote every time. Practice this today. The next time that voice tells you you're not enough, not ready, not capable, don't argue with it, and don't obey it either. Just notice it, ask if you'd say it to someone you love, and take one small action in the direction of the thing it's trying to talk you out of. That single pattern, repeated enough times, is how the volume of that voice slowly changes, not because you silenced it through force, but because you stopped treating its opinion as the final word on who you are. It's worth saying plainly, this is not about achieving permanent silence from that voice, and chasing that goal will only frustrate you. The voice softens with practice, but it rarely vanishes completely, and that's fine, because the goal was never silence. The goal was authority. A quiet critic that no longer gets the final vote is a completely different relationship than a loud one that used to run your entire life. Progress here doesn't look like the voice disappearing. It looks like you continuing to move forward while it talks, instead of stopping every time it does. You have spent years listening to that voice as if it were the most honest narrator of your life. It isn't. It's the loudest, not the most accurate. Starting today, you get to decide which one actually gets to run the story.